My name is Hazel Lawson. I am 29 years old, and for the last 730 days, I have been a ghost in my own life. On paper, I should be a success story. I possess a degree in accounting that I earned with blood, sweat, and coffee, graduating near the top of my class. I have a mind that finds comfort in the absolute certainty of numbers, in the way a balance sheet must always zero out, leaving no room for interpretation or lies. In a fair world, I would be sitting in a corner office somewhere, managing audits and forecasting growth. But I do not live in a fair world. I live in the shadow of Ridgehaven, a town where the truth is whatever the loudest man in the room says it is. And unfortunately for me, the loudest man in Ridgehaven is my father. To the world outside my family, I am not Hazel Lawson, the diligent accountant. I am Hazel Lawson, the thief, the embezzler, the unstable daughter who stole from her own kin and cannot be trusted with a petty cash box, let alone a corporate account. That is the story my parents wrote for me. They penned it in ink that does not wash off, and they distributed it to every potential employer who dared to look at my resume. For 2 years. They made me unhireable. They turned me into a walking warning label. They thought that if they starved me of opportunity, if they cut off every route to independence, I would eventually crawl back to the big house on the hill, ready to serve the family dynasty on their terms. They were wrong. I stood on the pavement, the wind whipping around the corner of a busy city street that felt 1,000,000 miles away from the suffocating quiet of my hometown. Before me rose a tower of glass and steel, a monolith that reflected the gray sky and the rushing traffic. It was the kind of building that smelled of money and power, the kind of place that usually checked your pedigree at the door. I smoothed the fabric of my skirt. It was a cheap suit, bought from a thrift rack 3 years ago, and it was starting to fray at the hem. But it was clean. It was all I had left. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was a sharp, aggressive buzz that made my heart stutter against my ribs. I did not have to look to know who it was, but I looked anyway. The screen lit up with a message from Dylan. My brother. It is done. Dad called them. 5 words. Just 5 words. But they carried the weight of a prison sentence. My breath hitched in my throat, turning into a shallow, ragged gasp. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My brother did not send that text to warn me out of kindness. He sent it to taunt me. He sent it to remind me that the leash was still around my neck, no matter how far I ran. Dad called them. I closed my eyes, and for a terrifying second, I was not standing in the city. I was back in a small, cramped office in a mid-sized logistics firm 3 months ago. It had been one of the few interviews I had managed to land. The interview had gone perfectly. I had answered every technical question with precision. I had seen the hiring manager nod, seen him circle highly recommended on his notepad. I had felt that rare, fragile flutter of hope. Then, he had asked for 24 hours to run a final reference check. When I returned the next day, the atmosphere had shifted. The air in the room was heavy, curdled with suspicion. The manager would not meet my eyes. He shuffled papers on his desk, looking anywhere but at me. We have decided to move in a different direction, he had said, his voice flat. May I ask why? I had pressed, desperate. Yesterday, you said I was the strongest candidate. He had looked at me then, and I saw a mixture of pity and distaste in his gaze. It was the look you give a stray dog that you suspect has rabies. We made a call to your previous employer listed on your background check, to your family's company, for a character reference. And, I asked, though I already knew the answer. My stomach had dropped through the floor. Ms. Lawson, he said, standing up to dismiss me. We handle sensitive financial data here. Integrity is our currency. Based on what your father shared with us regarding your history with company funds, we cannot take the risk. You should be grateful he kept it internal and did not involve the police. You should ask your father why you are not sitting in a cell. I had walked out of that office with my ears ringing. There was no history with company funds. There was no theft. I had never taken a dime that was not mine. In fact, I was the one who had caught the discrepancies in my father's books during my brief, unpaid internship years ago. I was the one who had pointed out that the construction overruns were not adding up, but the truth did not matter. What mattered was that Grant Lawson was a pillar of the community, a man who donated to the fire department and shook hands with senators. If he said his daughter was a thief, then she was a thief, back on the city street. The wind bit at my exposed skin. I looked at the text message again. It is done. Dad called them. This time, he thought he had crushed me for good. This was the final door I had left to knock on, the biggest long shot of my life. He knew where I was today. He knew who I was meeting, and he had made the call. He had picked up the phone, put on his charming, concerned father voice, and he had poured poison into the ear of the man I was about to see. He had likely said that he loved me, but I was troubled. He had likely said he wanted to protect this company from my sticky fingers. He thought he had just welded the lock shut, but there was something my father did not know. He thought the game was played on a checkerboard, where he could just sweep the pieces off the table whenever he was losing. He did not realize that someone else had set up a chessboard 15 years ago, anticipating this exact move. I slipped the phone into my pocket, my hand brushing against the cool lining of my blazer. I took a deep breath, inhaling the exhaust fumes and the scent of rain. My hands were shaking. Yes, the fear was real. The trauma of 2 years of systematic gaslighting does not vanish overnight. But beneath the fear, there was something else, something cold and hard, like a diamond formed under miles of pressure. My grandmother, Eleanor Price, was a woman who spoke very little, but when she did, you listened. She was the only person my father had ever truly feared. Though he tried to hide it with bluster and noise, when I was 14 years old, on a humid afternoon when the air was thick enough to chew, she had sat me down on her porch. I was crying because my father had canceled my math camp to pay for Dylan's tennis lessons. It was a small injustice compared to what would come later. But at the time, it felt like the end of the world. She had wiped my face with a handkerchief that smelled of lavender and old paper. "Hazel," she had said, her voice raspy but steady, "your father believes he owns the house, the land, and everyone standing on it. He thinks he holds all the keys." "He does," I had sobbed. "I can't do anything." "He holds the keys to the doors he built," she corrected me. She had looked me in the eye, her gaze piercing. "But you must remember this. A smart woman does not just beg for entry. If she knows the doors are locked, she builds her own." She had leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a whisper, as if the walls of the house behind us had ears. "There will come a time, child, when he will try to corner you. He will try to take everything that makes you who you are. He will try to make you small so you fit in his pocket. When that day comes, and when you have nowhere left to turn, you will know who to find. I have made sure of it." I had not understood her then. I thought she meant I should pray, or perhaps run away. But Eleanor Price was not a woman of vague platitudes. She was a woman of ledgers, of contracts, and of long-term investments. I looked up at the towering glass building again. This wasn't just a corporate headquarters. It was the location of the back door my grandmother had built. My father thought he had won. He thought that by calling ahead, by branding me a criminal to the CEO of this massive conglomerate, he had destroyed my last hope. He thought I would turn around, get back on the bus, and come home to Ridgehaven, broken and ready to submit. He expected me to be crying right now. Instead, I felt a strange, terrifying calm settling over me. I was not here to ask for a job. Not really. I was here to deliver on a promise. There was an envelope involved in this story. I had never held it in my hands, never broken the seal, but I knew it existed. I knew that 15 years ago. My grandmother had sat in a room with a man who was now one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, and she had handed him something. She had given him instructions that were to be executed only if, and when, I walked through his doors of my own free will. My father thought he had locked every exit, but he had forgotten that my grandmother was the one who taught him how to read a blueprint, and she knew exactly where the structural weaknesses were. I checked my watch. It was 8:55 in the morning. My appointment was at 9. This was not going to be a miracle. I do not believe in miracles. I believe in compound interest. I believe in documentation. I believe in the undeniable weight of evidence. This was not a fairy tale where the heroine is saved by a prince. This was a heist, executed in slow motion over a decade and a half. It was a plan constructed of paper, ink, and perfect timing. My father had spent 2 years destroying my reputation. He had spent a lifetime building his own image as the benevolent patriarch of Ridgehaven. He loved an audience. He loved the sound of his own voice holding court. And the irony? The beautiful, devastating irony of what was about to happen. He was going to get exactly what he wanted. He was going to get an audience. He was going to get the attention of the most powerful people in the state. And in front of that crowd, without anyone pressing a gun to his head, without anyone twisting his arm, he was going to tell the truth. He was going to stand up and sentence himself. I took one last look at my reflection in the glass doors. The woman staring back looked tired. Her eyes were shadowed, her cheeks a little too hollow from months of eating cheap noodles and skipping meals. But her back was straight. "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the empty air. "You made the call. Now let's see who answers." I pushed open the heavy glass doors and walked into the lobby. The air conditioning hit me like a physical blow, cold and sterile. The receptionist looked up, her smile practiced and polite, unaware that the woman walking toward her was carrying a grenade that had been armed 15 years ago. The text message from my brother still burned in my pocket. "It is done." He was right. It was done. Just not in the way they thought. The waiting was over. The rumors stopped here. I was Hazel Lawson, and I was done running. I was about to find out exactly what my grandmother had left for me, and God help anyone who tried to stand in the way. To understand why I stood in that high-rise lobby with my heart hammering against my ribs. You have to understand where I came from. You have to understand Ridgehaven. It is a picture postcard town, the sort of place that gets featured in magazines as one of the best places to raise a family. The lawns are manicured to within an inch of their lives. The fences are aggressively white, and the secrets are buried so deep under the flower beds that the hydrangeas bloom with unnatural vibrancy. And sitting at the very top of this ecosystem, like monarchs on a throne made of drywall and mid-range lumber, was the Lawson family. My father, Grant Lawson, was not just a man. He was an institution. He owned Lawson Construction, the company that had built half the subdivisions in the county and renovated the other half. He was a man who took up space. When he walked into a room, the air pressure seemed to change. He had a laugh that rattled windows and a handshake that was meant to crush your knuckles just enough to let you know he was in charge. He was the kind of man who sat on the front pew at church every Sunday, singing the hymns louder than anyone else, convinced that God was particularly interested in his vocal range. My mother, Sylvia, was his perfect counterpart. She was the curator of the Lawson image. If my father was the hammer, she was the velvet cloth that covered the bruises. She was beautiful in a brittle, terrifying way, always dressed as if a photographer were hiding in the bushes. Her life's work was maintaining the fiction that we were the American dream personified. She managed the social calendar, the charity galas, and the rumors. In Ridgehaven, if Sylvia Lawson did not invite you to her Christmas party, you might as well pack your bags and move 2 towns over. And then there was Dylan. My brother was 2 years older than me, and from the moment he took his first breath, he was the sun around which our domestic solar system revolved. Dylan was the heir apparent. He had my father's jawline and my mother's ability to lie with a straight face. He was the star quarterback who never quite made it to college ball, the business major who barely scraped by with C-minuses, but was hailed as a visionary every time he managed to tie his own tie. Dinner at the Lawson house was a theatrical production. The dining room table was long, polished mahogany that smelled of lemon oil. My father sat at the head, of course. Dylan sat to his right. My mother sat opposite Dylan, and I sat at the far end. Or sometimes, I did not sit at all. I remember one specific Tuesday evening when I was 22. I had just come home with my final semester grades, a transcript full of straight A's that represented 4 years of sleepless nights and caffeine addiction. I placed the paper on the sideboard, hoping someone might pick it up. "Pass the potatoes, Hazel," my father said, not looking up from his plate. I stood up and moved the serving dish. "You will never guess who I ran into today." "Grant," my mother said, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of gossip. "The mayor. He asked about Dylan specifically. He wanted to know when our boy is going to join the firm officially." My father beamed, slicing into his steak with gusto. "Ideally. Next month, I have a project over on Elm Street that needs a project manager. I think Dylan is ready to lead." I paused with the water pitcher in my hand. I knew the Elm Street project. It was complex, involving zoning variances and tight budget constraints. Dylan had failed his Intro to Management class twice. "That sounds like a lot of responsibility," I said softly. "Maybe he should start with something smaller?" The table went silent. It was the silence of a bomb squad watching a wire get cut. Dylan laughed, a sound that was more scoff than humor. "Hazel is just jealous. Dad, she thinks because she is good at homework, she knows how the real world works." "Your brother has instincts, Hazel," my father said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all its warmth. "Instincts cannot be taught in a library. You would do well to remember your place. We do not need critics at this table. We need supporters. I am just saying," I tried again, my grip on the pitcher tightening. "If the zoning is wrong, the fines could be—" "Hazel," my mother cut in, her voice sweet and sharp like glazed glass. "The gravy boat is empty. Go fill it up, darling, and stop boring the men with details." That was my role. I was the detail that bored them. I was the fixer who was never acknowledged. When Dylan crashed his car into a neighbor's fence, I was the one who drove over with the checkbook and the apology letter while my parents formulated a story about a mechanical failure. When my father's tax filings were a mess, I was the one who spent 3 nights organizing the receipts, only for him to hand them to his expensive CPA and take the credit for being organized. I learned early on that in the Lawson household, there was a script. Dylan was the protagonist, my parents were the directors, and I was the stagehand, expected to dress in black and move the furniture in the dark so the stars wouldn't stub their toes. I once overheard a conversation between my parents when I was supposed to be asleep. I was 16, sitting at the top of the stairs, clutching a college brochure I had been too afraid to show them. "She is talking about going to university in Boston," my mother had whispered, sounding scandalized. "She wants to study finance." "Let her study," my father had grunted, the sound of ice hitting a glass echoing up the stairs. "It keeps her busy, but she is not going to Boston. She stays here, a girl like Hazel. She does not have the constitution for the city. Daughters just need to be stable. Sylvia, not ambitious. Ambition in a woman looks like desperation. Stable, not ambitious." That phrase became the invisible fence around my life. They did not mind if I was smart. As long as my intelligence was used to serve the family interests, they did not mind if I was capable. As long as I never outshone Dylan, their control was absolute because it was financial. In Ridgehaven, you could not get a loan, rent a decent apartment, or get a permit without Grant Lawson knowing about it. He had built a network of favors and debts that covered the town like a spider web. If you were on his good side, doors opened. If you were on his bad side, you found yourself waiting 6 months for a plumber. When I graduated, the expectation was set in stone. I was to come home, live in my childhood bedroom, and work at Lawson Construction. "We have a desk for you," my father had said, phrasing it like a gift. "You can handle the payroll, help the secretary. It is an unpaid internship for the first year. Of course, you are living under my roof, eating my food. That is your salary. Consider it an investment in your future husband. Men like a woman who knows how to save a penny." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw the trap for what it really was. It was not an offer. It was a cage. If I took that job, I would never leave. I would spend the next 40 years cleaning up Dylan's messes, hiding income for my father, and begging for an allowance like a child. No, I had said. The word hung in the air, foreign and dangerous. Excuse me? My father's face went a shade of red that usually preceded a shouting match. I said no. I have a degree in accounting. I am a certified professional. I will not work for free, and I will not be a glorified secretary. I am going to find a job that pays me what I am worth. That was the moment the war started. That was the moment I became the enemy. But what they did not know was that I had not arrived at that moment of rebellion on my own. I had been trained. My trainer was an old woman who smelled of menthol cigarettes and expensive perfume, who lived in the guest cottage at the back of the property because she refused to live in the main house with that pompous windbag, as she called my father, my grandmother, Eleanor Price. She was my mother's mother. But the two women could not have been more different. Sylvia was a willow tree, bending whichever way the wind blew. Eleanor was an oak, gnarled and tough and impossible to uproot. She had been a bookkeeper in the city 40 years ago, back when women were expected to make coffee, not balance sheets. She had outlived 2 husbands and managed her own portfolio with a ruthlessness that terrified her stockbroker. Eleanor was the only person in the world who saw me. While my parents were fawning over Dylan's latest participation trophy, Eleanor would signal me to follow her to the cottage. Her space was different from the main house. It was cluttered with books, stacks of financial newspapers, and the thick, heavy smell of old paper. "Sit down," she would command, pointing to the leather chair opposite her desk. "Stop slouching. You look like a question mark. Be an exclamation point." She started teaching me when I was 12, not how to bake cookies or how to sew, but how to read a ledger. She taught me the difference between gross and net, between an asset and a liability. She taught me how to spot a shell company and how to trace a dollar through a maze of transactions until it came out the other side. "Why do I need to know this, Grandma?" I asked one rainy afternoon, struggling with a complex depreciation schedule she had set for me. "I just want to read my novel." Eleanor took a drag of her cigarette, a habit she hid from my mother, and exhaled a plume of blue smoke. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp as flint. "Listen to me, Hazel. People lie. Men, especially, lie. They lie about where they were. They lie about who they love. And they lie about how much power they have. But numbers?" She tapped the ledger with a manicured fingernail. "Numbers are the only honest thing in God's creation. If you put 2 and 2 together, it will always equal 4, no matter how much a man shouts at it to be 5. She grabbed my chin gently, forcing me to look at her. "In this family, they will try to tell you that your worth is based on who you marry or how nice your table setting is. That is a lie. Your worth is what you can build with your own 2 hands and keep in your own name. Understanding the numbers is not just schoolwork. Hazel, understanding the numbers is understanding freedom." She saw through my father completely. At family gatherings, while everyone else was nodding along to Grant's boasting, I would catch Eleanor watching him. She wouldn't say a word. She would just sit there, sipping her iced tea, her eyes tracking him like a hawk tracking a field mouse. She noticed the way he sweated when the phone rang. She noticed the way he quickly changed the subject when someone asked about the timeline of the new municipal project. She was recording it all. There was a bookshelf in her cottage, filled with classics and biographies, but on the bottom shelf, tucked behind a row of encyclopedias, was a small metal box. It was dark gray, heavy, and locked with a combination dial. I asked her about it once, when I was 15. I had reached for a book, and the box had clanked against the wood. "What is in there, Grandma?" I asked, reaching for it. "Don't touch that," her voice snapped. Sharper than I had ever heard it, I pulled my hand back, startled. "I am sorry," she softened immediately, sighing. "No, I am sorry, child. I did not mean to bark. That box, that is for later." "Later?" "For a rainy day," she said, a strange, sad smile playing on her lips. "Your father thinks he has built a fortress. He thinks he has walled us all in. But he forgets that I was the one who bought the land this house sits on. I know where the foundations are weak. She looked at the box, then at me. One day, Hazel, you might find yourself in a corner. You might find that the world has turned its back on you because of who your family is. When that day comes, you will need more than good grades and a kind heart. You will need leverage. She never opened the box in front of me. She never told me the combination. But I felt its presence in the room every time we had a lesson. It sat there, a silent observer, a heavy gray promise waiting for its moment. As I grew older and the tension in the main house worsened, Eleanor became more urgent in her lessons. She stopped teaching me basics and started teaching me forensic accounting. She would pull out redacted copies of real company files, I never knew where she got them, and make me find the fraud. Find the ghost employee, she would say. Find the inflated invoice, find the kickback. And when I found it, she would not praise me. She would just nod and say, "Good, now you are armed." My parents thought I was over at the cottage reading poetry or helping an old woman with her knitting. They never suspected that right under their noses. The stable, unambitious daughter was being sharpened into a blade. They were too busy looking at Dylan, too busy polishing their own crowns, to notice that the old queen in the cottage was training the exile to retake the kingdom. But then Eleanor died. It happened 3 years before I stood in that lobby. A stroke took her in her sleep. The funeral was grand, of course. My father gave the eulogy, talking about her grace and her kindness. Words that felt like ashes in my mouth because he had hated her and she had despised him. He cried on the podium, a performance worthy of an Oscar. I did not cry at the funeral. I stood at the back, dry-eyed and furious, thinking about the cottage being cleared out. My father had ordered everything boxed up the day after she passed. He said he was handling the estate. I knew what that meant. He was looking for money. He was looking for anything she might have hidden. I thought about the gray box behind the encyclopedias. I assumed he had found it. I assumed he had forced it open and taken whatever leverage she had spoken of. I assumed that her plan, whatever it was, had died with her. I was wrong. Grant Lawson was a greedy man, but he was not a careful one. He looked for bank accounts and jewelry. He did not look for contingencies. He did not understand that Eleanor Price played the long game. And now, standing in the city, 2 years into my exile, I realized that the lessons in the cottage were not just theoretical. She had not just been teaching me how to be an accountant. She had been teaching me how to read the map she was leaving behind. I was not just Hazel Lawson, the failed daughter. I was Eleanor Price's student. And class was finally in session. The ink on my diploma was barely dry when the first wall went up. I remember the day vividly because it felt like the precise moment my life bifurcated, splitting into the timeline I had earned and the timeline my father had decided I deserved. It was 3 days after graduation. The ceremony had been a blur of polyester robes and polite applause, during which my father had spent the entire time checking his watch, presumably calculating how much billable time he was wasting by watching his daughter receive a distinct honor. I was sitting in the study, a room that always smelled of cedar and stagnation. My father was behind his desk, the only place he ever really looked comfortable. He did not look at me. He was leafing through a stack of invoices, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "So," he said, not looking up, "the party is over. You have the piece of paper. Now comes the reality." "I am ready for reality," I said, sitting up straighter. "I have already started sending out resumes. I have a list of firms in the city that are hiring junior associates." My father stopped shuffling the papers. He took off his glasses and folded them slowly, a gesture that usually meant he was about to deliver a verdict. "There is no need for that," he said. "I have spoken to Dylan. We have decided that you will come into the office starting Monday." I blinked. "The office? You mean Lawson Construction?" "Obviously," he said. "Your brother is going to be taking on more leadership roles. He needs support. He needs someone to handle the minutiae. Filing, answering the phones, Keeping the coffee pot full. You know, the things that distract the people who are actually doing the business. I felt a cold prickle at the back of my neck. Dad, I have a degree in accounting. I graduated with highest honors. I'm not going to be a secretary. It is not a secretary position, he said, waving his hand dismissively. It is an internship. You will learn the family business from the ground up. You will live here, of course. So your room and board are covered. We will not be paying a salary for the first 12 months. Consider it tuition for the real world. For a moment, I thought he was joking. An unpaid internship? To fetch coffee for the brother who had once asked me how to spell equity. It was not just an insult. It was an erasure. He was asking me to take my 4 years of hard work and feed them into a shredder. I appreciate the offer, I said, keeping my voice level, channeling every ounce of Eleanor Price's steel I could find. But no, I want to build my own career. I want to work somewhere where I am hired for my skills, not my last name. I need to get outside experience. I waited for the explosion. I waited for him to slam his fist on the desk or turn that dangerous shade of purple. But nothing happened. He just stared at me. It was a flat, dead stare, like a shark looking at a piece of driftwood. You want outside experience, he repeated. Yes. He picked up his glasses again. Suit yourself. That was it. 2 words. Suit yourself. He did not argue. He did not yell. He just went back to his invoices. At the time, I thought I had won. I thought I had stood my ground and he had respected it, or at least accepted it. I walked out of that study feeling lighter than air. I told myself that Grant Lawson was finally realizing he could not control me. I was naive. I did not understand that suit yourself was not a concession. It was a command to his soldiers. It was the signal to open fire. The war did not start with a bang. It started with silence. I began applying for jobs with the ferocity of someone who knows their survival depends on it. I tailored every cover letter. I proofread my resume until the words blurred together. I targeted firms in the next town over, places just outside of Ridgehaven's immediate gravity, thinking that distance would equal safety. At first, it went well, exceptionally well. In fact, I got calls back almost immediately. My grades and my internship history, the real one I had done during summers, not the fictional one my father proposed, opened doors. I remember my first interview at a mid-sized firm called Henderson Logistics. The hiring manager was a woman named Mrs. Gable, a sharp, no-nonsense type who seemed to appreciate my direct answers. We spent 40 minutes talking about tax codes and compliance strategies. By the end of it, she was smiling. You are incredibly articulate. Hazel, she had said, closing her folder. And frankly, your test scores are higher than the last 3 candidates combined. I need to run the standard background checks, but I would like you to come back on Thursday to meet the partners. Keep your afternoon free. I walked out of that building floating. I called my mother from the parking lot, desperate for some connection, some validation. I think I got it, Mom, I said. They want me back on Thursday. That is nice, dear, she said, her voice thin and distracted. Don't get your hopes up. These things are tricky. Thursday came. I put on my best suit. I drove 40 minutes to the Henderson office. I walked up to the receptionist, ready to charm the partners. I am here to see Mrs. Gable, I said. The receptionist did not smile. She looked at her computer screen, then at me, then back at the screen. One moment, she picked up the phone and whispered something I could not hear. A minute later, Mrs. Gable came out to the lobby. She did not invite me back to her office. She stopped 3 feet away from me, her arms crossed tight across her chest, her face shut down like a storefront after hours. Mrs. Gable? I extended my hand. She did not take it. Ms. Lawson, there has been a change in plans. The position has been filled. I froze. Filled? But you asked me to come back to meet the partners. You said, I know what I said, she interrupted, her voice chilly. But circumstances have changed. We are not proceeding with your application. Please do not contact us again." She turned on her heel and walked away before I could even draw a breath. I stood there in the lobby, humiliated, while the receptionist pretended to type very loudly. It happened again and again. I interviewed at a bank. The branch manager told me I was a perfect fit. 2 days later, I received a generic email stating they were pursuing other candidates. I interviewed at a small accounting firm. The interview went an hour over time because we were getting along so well. The next morning, the rejection letter was in my inbox. It was baffling. I was qualified. I was presentable. I was nailing the interviews. Yet, every single time, right at the finish line, something invisible would trip me. I started to spiral. I spent nights awake, analyzing every word I had said. Was I too confident? Was I too quiet? Did I have something on my teeth? I rewrote my resume 3 times. I asked a professor from college to write me a new letter of recommendation. I lowered my standards, applying for junior bookkeeping roles, then data entry clerks. The result was always the same: interest, enthusiasm, and then a sudden, inexplicable coldness. The breaking point came 6 weeks later. I was sitting in the cramped office of a staffing agency in a town 20 miles away. The recruiter was a young guy, barely older than me, named Mike. He looked tired. He had my file open on his desk. "Look, Hazel," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I want to place you. I really do. You are overqualified for the temp jobs, and you are perfect for the permanent ones. But I have sent your profile to 4 different clients this week, and they all kicked it back." "Why?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Mike, you have to tell me, is there a mistake on my background check? Is there a criminal record that isn't mine? What is going on?" He looked at the door to make sure it was closed, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "It is not a record, exactly. It is a flag, informally." "What kind of flag?" "We call to verify past employment," he said. "Standard procedure. You listed Lawson Construction as a reference for your summer work." "Yes, my father's company. I worked there for 3 summers." Mike grimaced. "Yeah, well, when we call the number you provided, we get directed to the owner, to your father." My heart stopped. And, look, I shouldn't be telling you this. It is confidential." Mike stammered. "But the feedback isn't good. It is actually really bad. The word used was untrustworthy. And there was a mention of internal theft, significant theft." The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the desk to keep from falling out of the chair. "Theft? That is a lie. That is a complete lie." "I believe you," Mike said. And he looked like he actually did. "But in this market, if a previous employer says you stole, you are radioactive, especially when that employer is your own family. People assume that if your own father won't vouch for you, there must be something seriously wrong. No one wants to take the risk." I drove home in a daze. The landscape rolled by, the manicured lawns, the white fences, the lie of Ridgehaven. But all I could see was the red haze of betrayal. It was not just that he was blocking me. It was the specific nature of the lie. Theft. He knew that for an accountant, integrity was the only asset that mattered. You could be bad at math and use a calculator, but if you were branded a thief, you were dead. He was not just grounding me, he was executing my future. I pulled into the driveway, the tires screeching on the asphalt. I slammed the car door and stormed into the house. It was just past 6 in the evening. Dinner was being served. My parents were at the table. Dylan was there, laughing at something on his phone. They looked up as I entered. I must have looked deranged. My hair was windblown, my face blotchy with suppressed rage. "Hazel," my mother said, holding a salad spoon. "You are late. Wash your hands." "Did you tell them I was a thief?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it shook the glasses on the table. My father slowly cut a piece of roast chicken. He put it in his mouth, chewed deliberately, and swallowed. Then he looked at me. "I beg your pardon?" "The staffing agency," I said, stepping closer to the table. The bank, Henderson Logistics, all of them. They called you, and you told them I stole from the company. I told them the truth, my father said calmly. What truth? I screamed. I never took a dime from you. I balanced your books. I found the errors you made. You took advantage of our hospitality, he said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly reasonable. You lived in this house. You ate our food, and yet, when asked to contribute, you refused. You tried to take the education I paid for and sell it to strangers. In my eyes, that is theft. You are stealing the return on my investment. That is not what theft means, I yelled. You told them I stole money. You told them I was a criminal. Semantics, he said, waving his fork. The point is, you are not trustworthy. You demonstrated that when you turned your back on this family. If you cannot be loyal to your own blood, how can you be loyal to a stranger's company? I did those people a favor by warning them. I looked at my mother. She was staring at her salad, her hand gripping the napkin so hard her knuckles were white. Mom, I pleaded, you know this isn't true. You know I never stole anything. Tell him to stop. Tell him to call them back. She did not look up. Hazel, please, don't shout. The neighbors. I don't care about the neighbors, I cried. He is destroying my life. He is making it impossible for me to get a job. He is just trying to help you see reason, my mother whispered, her eyes still fixed on the lettuce. You are being so stubborn. If you just accepted the internship, if you just stayed home where you belong, none of this would be happening. Help me? I laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. This isn't help. This is blackmail. It is parenting, my father said. He took a sip of wine. The world is a hard place. Hazel, the sooner you learn that you need protection, the better. Now, sit down. Your dinner is getting cold. And if you are done with this tantrum, the offer for the internship is still open. Although, given your recent behavior, we might have to reconsider the room and board arrangement. Dylan snickered. He actually snickered. Yeah, Hazel, don't be a thief. I looked at them, the three of them. The unholy trinity of my existence, my father, the architect of my ruin, eating roast chicken as if he hadn't just murdered my reputation, my mother, the witness who refused to testify, and my brother, the beneficiary of all my pain. I realized then that there was no reasoning with them. There was no logic that could penetrate the fortress of my father's ego. He had decided that if I would not be his servant, I would be nothing. He would burn the entire world down just to make sure I had nowhere to stand but in his shadow. I am not hungry, I said. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through wet concrete. I went up to my room and locked the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, the room dark, listening to the murmurs of their conversation continuing downstairs. They were moving on. They were talking about the weather, or the club, or Dylan's tennis game. They had already forgotten that they had just severed my jugular. But as I sat there, staring at the wall, the tears did not come. Instead, a cold clarity washed over me. I remembered Eleanor's voice. When he corners you, when he tries to make you small. He had played his card. He had used his nuclear option. He thought that by branding me a thief, he had chained me to this house forever. He thought I would break. He thought I would come downstairs tomorrow morning, apologize, and take the internship. He was wrong. He had not trapped me. He had just cut the last rope that held me to this family. I stood up and went to the closet. I pulled out my suitcase. I did not pack everything, just the essentials, my clothes, my laptop, and the little bit of cash I had managed to stash away in a hollowed-out book, a trick my grandmother had taught me years ago. If I was going to be a thief in their eyes, I might as well steal myself back. I was leaving, and I wasn't going to tell them where I was going. Freedom, I quickly discovered, had a very specific price tag, and mine was depleting at a terrifying rate. When I walked out of my parents' house, I had felt a surge of adrenaline, a high that convinced me I could conquer the world on righteous indignation alone. But indignation does not pay the rent, and rage does not buy groceries. The cash I had squirreled away in the hollowed-out book, roughly $2,400, began to evaporate the moment I crossed the county line. I moved to a city 3 hours away, a place where the Lawson name was just a collection of letters rather than a brand. I found a studio apartment in a neighborhood that real estate agents would politely describe as up and coming, but everyone else knew was just struggling. It was a single room above a 24-hour laundromat, which meant the floor was always vibrating with the hum of industrial dryers, and the air permanently smelled of fabric softener and exhaust fumes. The rent took $600 a month, leaving me with a dwindling math problem that kept me awake at night. I tried to apply for office jobs here. Thinking the distance would shield me, I was wrong. In the digital age, a bad reputation travels at the speed of light. My father's reach was not just local, it was professional. The construction industry is a small world, and he had poisoned the well thoroughly. Every time I submitted a resume, I could almost hear the rejection email hitting my inbox before I even clicked send. By the end of the first month, I had eaten through half my savings. By the middle of the second month, I was skipping dinner to save money for bus fare. I stopped looking for accounting jobs. I stopped looking for anything that required a background check or a reference. I needed cash, and I needed it immediately. That was how I found myself standing at the service entrance of Pinebrook Lodge. It was not a 5-star hotel. It was a roadside establishment that catered to truckers, weary families on cross-country road trips, and people who needed a room for a few hours and paid in cash. The paint was peeling. The carpet in the lobby was a dizzying pattern of brown and orange from the 1970s, and the whole place smelled of stale cigarettes and pine-scented cleaner. I walked into the manager's office. Marla Quinn sat behind a desk buried under stacks of paper. She was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of granite. Hard lines, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that had seen everything and were impressed by none of it. "I need a job," I said. "I will do anything." Marla did not look up from the schedule she was writing. "Do you have a criminal record?" "No," I said. It was the truth, even if my father claimed otherwise. "Do you have reliable transportation?" "I take the bus. It runs every 30 minutes. Can you lift 40 pounds? "Yes." She finally looked up. Her eyes scanned me, taking in my worn blazer and my desperate posture. She did not ask for a resume. She did not ask where I went to college. She did not ask who my father was. "Housekeeping," she said, her voice rough like sandpaper. $10 an hour. You start at 7 in the morning. If you are late twice, you are fired. If I catch you on your phone, you are fired. If a guest complains you were rude, you are fired. Do we have an understanding?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she grunted, shoving a uniform across the desk. "Thank the girl who quit yesterday because she couldn't handle the vomit in room 204. Here is your badge. Get to work." And just like that, Hazel Lawson, magna cum laude graduate, became Hazel the maid. The work was brutal. It was a physical assault on the senses that I was entirely unprepared for. My hands, once used to typing on a keyboard and turning delicate pages, were now constantly red and raw from industrial-strength chemicals. I learned that there is a specific hierarchy to dirt. There is the dust on a windowsill, which is easy. Then there is the grime in a shower grout, which requires elbow grease. And then there is the filth left behind by human beings who believe that because they paid $50 for a room, they have purchased the right to be animals. I cleaned up spilled beer, mysterious stains, and piles of fast food trash. I stripped beds that smelled of sweat and cheap cologne. I scrubbed toilets until my shoulders burned. My world shrank down to a checklist of 30 rooms a day. Knock 3 times. Announce housekeeping. Enter, strip, spray, scrub, make, exit, repeat. I was invisible. Guests would walk right past me in the hallway as if I were part of the wallpaper. If they did speak to me, it was usually to demand more towels or to complain that the ice machine was broken, as if I personally had gone in with a wrench and dismantled it. But in a twisted way, I welcomed the exhaustion. When I fell onto my mattress at night, my body was too tired to let my mind race. I was too busy calculating how many hours I needed to work to buy a new pair of shoes to worry about my shattered career. I was living minute by minute, dollar by dollar. Then came the Tuesday that broke me. It was 3 months into the job. I had been assigned the early shift, but Marla had asked me to stay late to help cover the evening turndown service because another maid had called out sick. I was pushing my cart through the lobby, heading toward the service elevator. The cart was heavy, loaded with fresh linens and cleaning supplies. One of the wheels had a wobble that made it pull to the left, requiring constant force to keep it straight. Pine Brook Lodge had a restaurant attached to it. It was a step above a diner, trying to be a steakhouse with dim lighting and heavy curtains. To get to the East Wing elevators, I had to pass the wide archway that led into the dining room. I was wrestling with the cart, my head down, focusing on the carpet pattern, when I heard a voice that made my blood freeze. "The prime rib here is surprisingly adequate. Sylvia, you should try it." I stopped. The cart squeaked and came to a halt. I knew that voice. It was a voice that had dictated every parameter of my life for 29 years. I slowly looked up. There, sitting at a large round table in the center of the room, was my family. My father, Grant, sat facing the entrance, his napkin tucked into his collar. My mother sat next to him, looking bored, and Dylan was there, swirling a glass of red wine. They were likely in town to inspect a potential development site nearby. My father had mentioned months ago he was looking to expand into this county. I should have run. I should have ducked behind the cart and sprinted for the kitchen, but I was paralyzed. My feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. My father looked up. His eyes scanned the room, looking for a waiter, and then they landed on me. For a second, he looked confused. He squinted, as if trying to process the image. He saw a woman in a shapeless gray uniform, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, holding a spray bottle of disinfectant. Then, the recognition hit. I watched his face transform. I expected anger. I expected him to look away in shame. I expected him to march over and demand why I was humiliating the family by scrubbing toilets in public. But he didn't do any of those things. He smiled. It started as a small smirk and grew into a wide, teeth-baring grin. He nudged Dylan and pointed right at me. Well, babe, my father said, his voice booming across the quiet restaurant. "Look who we have here." Dylan turned around when he saw me. His eyes widened, and then he let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. Is that Hazel?" Dylan asked, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "She is the help?" My mother finally looked. She went pale, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, dear God," she whispered. "Grant, don't." But Grant Lawson was enjoying himself too much to stop. He leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms wide. "I told you, didn't I?" he announced, addressing the table but projecting his voice at me. "I told everyone she would find her proper place. An accountant? Please, she was never built for the heavy lifting of the mind. Look at her. It suits her, doesn't it? The uniform covers up the lack of ambition perfectly." "Hey, Hazel," Dylan called out, waving his wine glass. "We need some more water over here, and bring some napkins while you are at it." My father threw his head back and laughed. It was a deep, guttural sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "Careful, son. Don't give her any money. You know what happens when she gets her hands on cash." The other diners were looking now. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others looked at me with pity. But my father and brother were laughing like it was the punchline to the greatest joke ever told. I was the joke. My struggle. My poverty. My desperate attempt to survive without them. It was all just entertainment for their dinner conversation. I stood there, gripping the handle of the cart so hard my fingernails dug into the plastic. I felt a heat rising up my neck, scorching my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the bottle of bleach and throw it at them. I wanted to march over there and flip the table, but I did nothing. I simply froze. It was as if my soul had decided to vacate the premises to avoid the damage. I went cold. Completely and utterly cold. The shame that had been burning me seconds ago suddenly turned into ice. I looked at my father, really looked at him. I saw the cruelty in his eyes, the absolute lack of love. He didn't want a daughter, he wanted a subject. And because I had rebelled, he was happy to see me as a serf. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I turned the cart around, the wobbly wheel screeching against the floor, and I walked away. I walked past the lobby, past the front desk where Marla was on the phone, and into the back hallway. I pushed the cart into the linen closet and left it there. I walked out the back door, into the cool night air. I didn't clock out. I just started walking. I walked the 3 miles back to my apartment. My feet blistered in my cheap work shoes. The wind cut through my thin uniform, but I didn't feel it. I felt hollowed out, like a pumpkin carved for Halloween. When I got to my studio, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor in the dark, still wearing the uniform that smelled of pine cleaner and other people's dirt. They had won. That was the thought that circled my brain. They had stripped me of everything. My career, my reputation, my dignity. They had forced me into the mud and then laughed at me for being dirty. I pulled my knees to my chest. I was ready to give up. I was ready to pack my bag, go back to Ridgehaven, and beg. I would take the unpaid internship. I would marry whoever they wanted. I would be the ghost they wanted me to be, just to stop this pain. But then, in the silence of that dark room, a memory surfaced. It wasn't my father's laugh. It was the smell of menthol cigarettes and old paper. When you are cornered, child, you will see the exit. The walls are only solid if you think they are. My grandmother's voice. It was so clear it was as if she were sitting on the futon next to me. They think you are weak because you are quiet. They don't know that quiet is where the planning happens. I lifted my head. I was cornered. I was at rock bottom. I had nothing left to lose. And that, I realized, was a dangerous place to be. When you have nothing to lose, you have nothing to fear. I stood up. My legs were stiff. I walked over to the closet where I had thrown my suitcase months ago. I hadn't fully unpacked it because, deep down, I think I had expected to fail. I dragged it out and unzipped the lining. I began to dig. I pulled out old sweaters I hadn't worn in years. I pulled out a stack of notebooks from college. I reached into the side pocket, the one I used for junk. Old receipts, gum wrappers, loose change. My fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular. I pulled it out. It was a phone, not my current smartphone with the cracked screen. This was an older model, a brick of a device that I had used in high school and my first year of college. I had tossed it in there years ago when I upgraded, thinking I might need it as a backup one day, and then promptly forgot about it. I stared at it in the dim light coming from the street lamp outside. It was dead, obviously. But as I turned it over in my hands, a jolt of electricity went through me that had nothing to do with the battery. This phone. I remembered something. I remembered a voicemail. I remembered a series of notifications that I had ignored because I was too busy with finals, too busy being the perfect student. I scrambled around the apartment, looking for a charging cable. I tore through drawers until I found a tangle of wires. I found an old micro USB cord and plugged it into the wall. I plugged the phone in. The screen remained black. I held my breath. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on, you piece of junk." 1 minute passed. 2. Then, a battery icon flashed on the screen. It was red, showing 1%. I sat back on my heels, watching that tiny red bar like it was a lifeline. My father thought he had cut all the wires. He thought he had silenced me, but he had forgotten that I was a hoarder of data. He had forgotten that I kept everything. And as the phone began to boot up, lighting up the dark room with its pale blue glow, I knew that the crying was over. The game was not finished. It was just halftime. I watched the loading symbols spin. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered into the dark. "Let's see what you left for me." The screen of the old phone flickered to life, casting a ghostly blue pallor over the peeling wallpaper of my studio apartment. It was a resurrection I had not truly believed would happen. As the operating system stabilized, the device began to convulse in my hand. It vibrated violently, a physical manifestation of 3 years of missed connections, forgotten updates, and digital ghosts clamoring for attention. The notifications cascaded down the screen in an endless stream. Birthdays I had missed, Facebook tags from high school friends I no longer spoke to, emails from newsletters I had subscribed to when I was a different person, but I ignored them all. My thumb hovered over the voicemail icon. There was a red badge on it with the number 1. I pressed it. The timestamp read, October 14th, 2023. My breath caught in my throat. That date. It was exactly 4 days after my grandmother's funeral. It was the week I had been in a haze of grief, barely functioning. While my father had been suspiciously efficient about clearing out her cottage, I raised the phone to my ear, my hand trembling slightly. The voice that crackled through the tiny speaker was dry, formal, and unfamiliar. Ms. Lawson, this is Arthur Sterling from the firm of Sterling and Vance. We are attempting to reach you regarding the estate file of Eleanor Price. We have a document here requiring your signature to initiate the secondary probate process. Please return our call at your earliest convenience. It is rather urgent. The message ended with a click. I sat there, the silence of the room pressing in on me. Secondary probate process? My father had told us there was a single will. He had stood in the living room, wearing his somber black suit, and told the family that Eleanor had left everything to him to manage for the good of the family. He had said there were some small tokens for us, a piece of jewelry for my mother, a watch for Dylan, but the bulk of the estate was absorbed into the Lawson Trust. He had never mentioned a secondary file, and he certainly had never mentioned a lawyer named Arthur Sterling. I looked at the time. It was 7:15 in the morning. Law firms would be opening soon. I did not go to sleep. I brewed a pot of coffee that tasted like battery acid and paced the length of my tiny room until the clock struck 8:30. Then, I dialed the number from the old voicemail log. The line rang 4 times before a receptionist picked up. Sterling and Vance, how may I direct your call? I am looking to speak with Arthur Sterling, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is Hazel Lawson. I am returning a call he made to me regarding the Eleanor Price estate. There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. One moment, please. Mr. Sterling retired last year, but let me pull up the archive. I waited, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling, praying that the file had not been shredded. Ms. Lawson? The receptionist returned, her voice sounding confused. I see the file here, but it is marked as closed. Closed? I gripped the phone tighter. How can it be closed? I never signed anything. Well, the notes here say that the executor of the primary estate contacted us, she explained. A Mr. Grant Lawson. He informed the firm that the beneficiary, that would be you, had reviewed the terms and declined the inheritance. He stated you were not interested in the complexities of the trust and wished to waive your claim. The room spun. I had to sit down on the floor before my legs gave out. He said I declined? I whispered. Yes, ma'am. We have a note here dated November 1st, 2023. Mr. Lawson acted as the family representative. Since we could not reach you directly after multiple attempts, and given his standing, the file was archived. I felt a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with the drafty apartment. It was the chill of absolute violation. He had not just stolen my career. He had not just poisoned my reputation. He had intercepted my inheritance. He had stood in front of a lawyer, wearing the mask of a concerned father, and lied. He had erased my name from my grandmother's legacy. I did not decline, I said, my voice rising. I never knew this file existed. My father lied to you. I want to reopen it. I want to see what was in that file. I am not sure we can do that easily, the receptionist stammered. The physical documents were transferred to a holding facility, and technically, the window for claiming that specific bequest has passed. You would need to file a motion to prove fraud or coercion. It is a complicated legal matter. Where are the documents now? I demanded. I can't say for sure without a retrieval order. It looks like some of the paperwork was forwarded to the primary executor at his request for safekeeping. That would be your father. I hung up the phone. I felt sick. He had them. He had taken whatever Eleanor had left for me, and he had buried it. Safekeeping was a joke. He had probably burned them. But why? If it was just money, he didn't need it. My father was wealthy. He didn't need to steal from his daughter. Unless it wasn't about money. Unless it was about something else. Power. Eleanor had said the box contained leverage. My father wasn't protecting his bank account. He was protecting his secrets. As I sat there, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal, my current phone, the one with the cracked screen, began to ring. I looked at the caller ID. Dad. The timing was so perfect it was almost comedic. I stared at the screen, watching the name flash. A part of me wanted to throw the phone against the wall. Another part, the part that Eleanor had trained, told me to answer, gather information. I slid my thumb across the screen. Hello? Hazel. His voice came through, warm and rich like melted butter. It was the voice he used for clients. It was the voice he used when he was about to close a deal. I am glad you picked up. What do you want? I asked. I didn't have the energy to fake politeness. I want to make peace, he said. We saw you last night at the lodge. Your mother. She was very distressed. Seeing you like that, cleaning up after strangers. It is not right. You are a Lawson. I am whatever you told people I was, I said. You told them I was a thief. So now I am a maid. It seems fitting, he sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. Hazel, we were angry. Things were said. But let's be reasonable. You have made your point. You have played the martyr. Now it is time to come home. I have a job, I said. That is not a job. He scoffed gently. That is penance. Listen, I have a proposition. Come back to the house. I will put you on the payroll. A real salary this time. $50,000 a year. You can work in the back office, handle the internal accounts. No public face. So the rumors won't matter. You will be safe. You will be taken care of. $50,000. It was a low salary for an accountant. But for a starving maid, it was a fortune. A week ago, I might have wept with gratitude. I might have thought he was finally showing mercy. But now, with the knowledge of the stolen inheritance burning in my mind, I heard the offer differently. He wasn't offering me a job. He was offering me hush money. He was trying to buy my silence before I even knew I had something to sell. And the condition? I asked. There is always a condition. You live at home, he said quickly. And you behave. No more outbursts. No more running away. You become the daughter we know you can be. We are a family. Hazel, we need to present a united front. I will think about it, I said. Don't think too long, he warned, a hint of steel returning to his tone. Opportunities don't last forever. I hung up. Immediately. A text from my mother popped up. Please come home. Hazel, your father is trying so hard. Don't be difficult. Then one from Dylan. Just take the money. You idiot. Stop embarrassing us. They were coordinating. It was a full-court press. They wanted me back under the roof, under the thumb, where they could see me. Why the sudden urgency? Seeing me at the lodge had rattled them, but not out of shame. It was something else. I needed to know why. I went to work that afternoon with a singular focus. I was not there to clean rooms. I was there to listen. Pinebrook Lodge was the hub of local business dealings. My father often held meetings in the private dining room or the back office, which the owner, a crony of his, let him use. I checked the reservation list at the front desk when Marla went to the bathroom. Grant Lawson, private room B, 7 p.m. He was coming back, 2 nights in a row. That was unusual. At 6:50, I clocked out but didn't leave. I changed out of my uniform into my street clothes, dark jeans and a black hoodie. I made my way to the service corridor that ran behind the private dining rooms. There was a storage closet that shared a wall with room B. The ventilation grate near the ceiling was old and loose. If you stood on the shelving unit, you could hear everything in the next room as if you were sitting at the table. I slipped into the closet and climbed up the metal rack, ignoring the smell of bleach and old mops. I pressed my ear toward the vent. I heard the scraping of chairs, ice clinking in glasses. "The scotch is excellent." "Grant," a voice said. I recognized it. It was Mr. Sterling. No, not the lawyer. It was Franklin Moretti, the owner of a large land development firm from the neighboring state, a man my father had been trying to partner with for years. "Only the best for you, Frank," my father's voice boomed. "So," Moretti said, his tone shifting to business, "the merger. We are ready to move forward on the Whispering Pines project, but my board is concerned about the local zoning. Ridgehaven is your territory, but they are worried about stability. They want to ensure the Lawson influence is permanent." "I told you," my father said. "I own this town. The zoning is a formality." "Formalities can be tricky," Moretti countered. "My son, Anthony, is taking over the regional division next year. He needs a strong local connection. We were thinking a more formal alliance." My heart stopped. "Dylan is ready to step up," my father said. "Not Dylan," Moretti interrupted. "Dylan is a good boy, but he is soft. I'm talking about marriage. Grant, old school. We merged the families. Anthony needs a wife who knows the business. Someone who comes from the right stock. It cements the trust. It guarantees the contracts." There was a pause. I held my breath, dust motes dancing in front of my eyes. "I have a daughter," my father said slowly. "I heard she was troubled," Moretti said. "Rumors about theft? Unstable?" "Teenage rebellion," my father said smoothly. He was lying so easily it was breathtaking. "We had to be strict with her, spread a little disinformation to humble her, but she is back in the fold. In fact, she is starting work at the main office next week. She is an accountant. Smart, quiet. Know her place. She will make Anthony an excellent wife. She understands that the business comes first." "Is she agreeable?" "She will be," my father said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "She has learned the hard way that life without the family is cold and hungry. She is ready to do what she is told. Give me a month, I will have her ring ready." I almost fell off the shelf. The job offer, the peacemaking, the $50,000. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't even about controlling me. It was about fattening up the livestock before the sale. He was trading me. He was literally trading me for a zoning permit and a merger deal. He had destroyed my reputation to make me desperate enough to crawl back, just so he could scrub me clean and hand me over to Anthony Moretti like a prize heifer. She knows her place. I climbed down from the shelf, my limbs shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. I wasn't a daughter to him. I wasn't even a human being. I was an asset class. I was a bargaining chip. And he had blocked my inheritance because if I had money, if I had the freedom Eleanor intended for me, I wouldn't need to be sold. I slipped out of the closet and into the alley behind the kitchen. The night air hit my face, cooling the sweat on my forehead. I looked at my phone. The text from my mother still glowed on the screen. "Don't be difficult." "Difficult?" I whispered to the darkness. "You have no idea." I wasn't going to call the lawyer back. I wasn't going to argue with the receptionist. And I certainly wasn't going home to marry Anthony Moretti. My grandmother had left me a way out. My father had tried to bury it, but he had made a mistake. He thought that by blocking the front door, he had trapped me. He didn't know that I had the map to the cellar. I needed to find where he was keeping those safekeeping documents, and I knew exactly where to start looking. The timeline in the voicemail, October 14th, 3 years ago, the day he claimed to be the family representative. I walked toward the bus stop. But this time, I wasn't walking like a maid. I was walking like an auditor. I was walking like a woman who was about to conduct the most aggressive audit of Grant Lawson's life. He wanted to play games with paper? Fine. I was going to bury him in it. The realization that I was being fattened for slaughter changed the chemistry of my blood. It replaced the lingering traces of fear with a cold, hard resolve. I could not just hide in a cheap apartment 3 hours away anymore. My father's ambition had a long reach, and if he was willing to trade me like a commodity to secure a merger. Nowhere in this state was safe. I had to vanish, and not just vanish. I needed to ascend to a place where the oxygen was too thin for men like Grant Lawson to breathe. I went back to my apartment that night and opened my laptop. It was time to execute an exit strategy. But this time, I was not running away from something. I was running toward a specific target. Even if I did not quite know what it was yet. The problem, as any accountant will tell you, was the gap in the ledger. My resume was a disaster. It featured a stellar academic record, followed by a gaping 2-year black hole where my professional career should have been. I sat there, staring at the blinking cursor. How do you explain 2 years of silence? Do you call it a sabbatical? A health crisis? I decided to try the truth. Not the whole truth, but a version of it. I applied to firms in cities I had never visited. Chicago, Seattle, Boston, when I got pre-screening calls, which happened rarely. I tried to explain the gap with honesty. I had a family dispute. I told a nice HR representative from a mid-sized firm in Denver. My former employer, who is my father, refused to provide a reference due to a personal conflict. The change in her tone was instantaneous. I see. We appreciate your candor, Ms. Lawson. However, we generally look for candidates with a more continuous history. I heard the subtext loud and clear. Drama. Corporate America is allergic to drama. They do not want to hire someone who comes with baggage. Lawsuits, or a vindictive father who might call the CEO. I was a liability to them. I was just a walking lawsuit waiting to happen. After the 10th rejection, I sat in the break room at Pinebrook Lodge, my head in my hands. The smell of industrial coffee was making me nauseous. "You are doing it again," a voice rasped. I looked up. Marla Quinn was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed. She held a lit cigarette in one hand, ignoring the no smoking sign directly above her head. "Doing what?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. "Thinking too loud," she said. She walked over and pulled out a chair, the metal legs screeching against the linoleum. "You have been checking your phone every 5 minutes. You are jumpy, and you are cleaning the rooms like you are angry at the toilets. What is going on?" I looked at Marla. She was rough, cynical, and probably the most honest person I had met in 2 years. "My father found me," I said. "He wants me to come home so he can marry me off to a business rival's son to secure a contract." Marla took a long drag of her cigarette, exhaled a cloud of smoke toward the ceiling, and nodded as if I had just said it might rain tomorrow. "Rich people," she muttered. "They are just like the mafia, but with better tax lawyers. I need to leave. Marla, I can't stay here, but no one will hire me. I have a 2-year gap, and my last job is maid at a roadside motel. I am damaged goods." Marla leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You are not damaged. You are just in the wrong market. Look around you. Hazel, this place? It is a holding tank. It is where people end up when they fall off the map. You don't belong here. You walk like you are carrying a briefcase, not a bucket. Even when you are scrubbing the floor, you are doing it in a grid pattern. You are efficient. You are smart. And that is why you are failing." "I don't understand," I said. "You are trying to get hired by people who play by the normal rules," she said, tapping ash onto the floor. "But your situation isn't normal. You need to go somewhere where they don't care about your daddy's little construction company. You need to go somewhere so big, so high up, that the name Lawson sounds like a joke to them. You need to find a place that doesn't check references because they think they are the only ones who matter." She stood up and crushed the cigarette under her heel. "Get out of here, Hazel. Go to the city, the big city, and stop apologizing for the gap. Own it. Tell them you were busy surviving." Marla was right. I was playing small. I was trying to swim in the shallow end because I was afraid of drowning, but the shallow end was where the sharks like my father lived. I needed the ocean. I went back to my apartment and initiated a digital purge. I deleted my LinkedIn. I scrubbed my old Facebook. I locked down every account I had. But the digital world is sticky. A few days later, my phone pinged. It was a notification from Instagram. I had not posted anything in 2 years. But I had a private account I used just to follow news sites. I had slipped up. One evening, exhausted and lonely, I had posted a story. Just a photo of a rainy window with a caption that said, "Restarting." I had deleted it after 10 minutes, thinking no one saw it. I was wrong. The notification was a direct message from Dylan. "Nice view. Looks like the forecast in the tri-state area. We know you are looking for jobs. Hazel, Dad has alerts set up. You can't outrun the network. Just come home before it gets embarrassing." He was watching. They were tracking my IP address, or perhaps they had hired someone to do it. The walls were closing in again. I felt a surge of panic, but I shoved it down. If they were watching, then I had to move faster than they could react. I needed a target that was so audacious, so far out of their league that they wouldn't even have an alert set up for it. I opened a fresh browser window and typed in a name I had seen in the financial news. Crownward Equity Group. They were not just a company, they were a monolith. They handled private equity, venture capital, and sovereign wealth funds. Their headquarters was in the heart of the financial district in the capital. They were known for being ruthless, elite, and impenetrable. They didn't hire people like me. They hired valedictorians from Ivy League schools who had interned at Goldman Sachs since they were in diapers. It was a suicide mission for my resume. It was the longest of long shots. I clicked on their careers page. There was an opening for a junior financial analyst. The requirements were absurd. 5 years of experience, a master's degree preferred, and fluency in 3 languages. I had a bachelor's degree, 2 years of scrubbing toilets, and I spoke English and the language of desperation. "Screw it," I whispered. I didn't upload my standard resume. I wrote a new one. I didn't hide the gap. I didn't try to sugarcoat it. In the cover letter section, I didn't write the usual platitudes about being a team player. I wrote, "To whom it may concern, my name is Hazel Lawson. For the past 2 years, I have been systematically blocked from the workforce due to a personal vendetta by a former employer. I have maintained my skills independently. I possess a relentless eye for discrepancy and a tolerance for high-pressure environments that has been tested in the extreme. I am not looking for a career. I am looking for a meritocracy. If you want a resume that looks like everyone else's, delete this. If you want someone who will find the penny you lost in a billion-dollar haystack, call me." I hit submit. It felt like throwing a pebble into a black hole. I closed the laptop and started packing. I didn't wait for a response. I knew I had to leave the apartment anyway. Dylan's message had spooked me. If they knew the general area, they would send someone. 2 days later, I was sitting in a laundromat, washing my only suit, when my phone buzzed. It was an email. Subject: Interview request. Crownward Equity Group. I stared at it. It had to be spam, or a cruel joke by Dylan. I opened it. "Dear Miss Lawson, we received your application. It was unconventional. However, it caught the attention of our senior leadership. We would like to invite you for an in-person interview this Friday at 9 in the morning. Location: Crownward Tower, Executive Suite. Interviewer: Rowan Caldwell, CEO." I dropped my phone. The screen hit the linoleum with a crack, but I didn't care. Rowan Caldwell. The Rowan Caldwell. He was a legend. He was the kind of man who moved markets by raising an eyebrow. Why on earth would the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar firm be interviewing a junior analyst applicant? It didn't make sense. It smelled like a trap. My mind raced. Had my father reached him? Was this another setup? Was I going to walk into that office and find Grant Lawson sitting there with a smirk? No. My father was a big fish in a small pond. Rowan Caldwell was the ocean. Grant Lawson couldn't just call Rowan Caldwell. They existed in different stratospheres. I went into detective mode. I Googled the email address. It matched the corporate domain perfectly. I called the main switchboard of Crownward Equity. "Good afternoon, Crownward Equity," a smooth voice answered. "Hi, I am verifying an interview request," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "For Hazel Lawson, with Mr. Caldwell." There was a pause. "One moment, please." The hold music was classical, crisp and intimidating. "Ms. Lawson?" the receptionist returned. "Yes, I see you on the executive calendar for Friday at 9. You are cleared for the private elevator. Please bring photo identification." It was real. I sat back on the plastic chair of the laundromat, watching my suit tumble in the dryer. Why? Why me? Why now? And then I thought of the voicemail, the estate of Eleanor Price. My grandmother had said she built a back door. She had said she had prepared for this. Could this be it? Was Crownward Equity the door? I had $78 in my bank account. The bus ticket to the city cost $45. That left me with $33 for food and transit. I had nowhere to stay. I would have to sleep in the bus station or walk the streets until morning. I took my suit out of the dryer. It was warm. The fabric was cheap polyester, and it was starting to shine at the elbows, but it was clean. I found my shoes. The heels were worn down, but I had polished them with a black marker to hide the scuffs. I looked at myself in the reflection of the laundromat window. I looked tired. I looked like a woman who had been fighting a war with a spoon, but my eyes were clear. I was done running away. I was done hiding in motels. I was done letting my father dictate the narrative of my life. "Okay," I said to my reflection. "You want to play big? Let's play big." I went back to the apartment one last time. I left the key on the counter. I left a note for Marla that just said, "Thank you for the push." I walked to the bus station in the rain. I bought the ticket with cash. As I sat on the bus, watching the gray buildings of the town fade into the distance, I clutched my bag to my chest. Inside was the old phone, the charger, and a folder of documents I had printed out. Every rejection letter, every transcript, every piece of evidence I had. My brother thought I was defeated. My father thought I was broken. They were about to find out that they had made a critical error. They had stripped away everything I had to lose. I watched the highway markers fly by. Mile 1, mile 10, mile 50. I closed my eyes and rehearsed what I would say. I didn't know what Rowan Caldwell wanted. I didn't know if he was a friend or another enemy. But I knew one thing. "If this is the last door," I whispered, the engine of the bus humming beneath me, "I will not knock. I will kick it down." I fell asleep with my head against the cold window, dreaming of glass towers and the terrifying, beautiful sound of a seal breaking on an envelope. The bus carried me into the dark, toward a city that didn't know my name yet, but was about to learn it. The phone rang at 8:15 in the morning. It was not the jarring buzz of an alarm, but the sharp, intrusive trill of an incoming call that sliced through the thin air of the coffee shop bathroom, where I was frantically trying to steam the wrinkles out of my blazer using the hand dryer. I looked at the screen. There was no name, just a blocked number. But my stomach, which had been tight with nerves since I woke up, dropped straight to the tiled floor. I knew who it was. The timing was too precise to be anyone else. I pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear, my hand shaking just enough to make the plastic casing tap against my earring. "I know where you are going, Hazel," the voice said. There was no greeting, no preamble, just the terrifying omniscience of my father, Grant Lawson. His voice was calm, conversational even, which made it infinitely worse. It was the tone he used when he was discussing the weather or the demolition of a historic building. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, staring at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked huge and dark against the pallor of my skin. "Don't insult my intelligence," he replied smoothly. "Crownward Equity Group, the tower on 5th. Did you really think you could apply to a firm of that magnitude without the algorithm flagging it? Did you think you could step onto that playing field without me noticing?" I gripped the edge of the sink. "I have an interview, Dad. It is a job. That is all. It is not a job. It is a waste of everyone's time, he said. I have already made the call. Hazel, just like I did with the others. I spoke to their executive office 10 minutes ago. I told them exactly who you are. I told them about the theft. I told them about your instability. The offer is going to be rescinded before you even walk through the revolving doors. You can't do that, I whispered, though I knew he could. He had done it a dozen times before. It is already done, he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. Now, listen to me. This is the end of the road. I am done playing cat and mouse. You are going to turn around, get on a bus, and come home. If you walk into that building, if you try to embarrass me by dragging our name through the mud in front of men like Rowan Caldwell, the consequences will be severe. One more call from me, Hazel, and you won't just be unemployed, you will be unemployable. Anywhere. Forever. Come home, or handle the fallout yourself. The line went dead. I stood there, the silence of the bathroom amplifying the rushing of blood in my ears. He had called them. He had already poisoned the water. My phone buzzed again. A text message, this time from Dylan. You think the city doesn't have Dad's friends? He plays golf with half the board members in that district. Don't be stupid. Turn around. I looked at the phone, then at my reflection. The woman in the mirror was wearing a cheap suit that smelled faintly of laundromat detergent. Her shoes were colored in with a black marker. She was tired. She was terrified, but there was something else in her eyes, something that hadn't been there 2 years ago. It was the cold, hard glint of a person who has already lost everything. He called, I said to the mirror. He called them. If he had already called, then the damage was done. If I walked away now, I lost. If I walked in and they threw me out, I lost. The outcome was mathematically identical. But if I walked in, at least I would see the face of the man who rejected me. At least I would force them to look me in the eye when they did it. I left the coffee shop and walked 2 blocks to the financial district. The crownward building rose out of the pavement like a shard of black crystal piercing the sky. It was 50 stories of intimidation. The glass was so dark and reflective that it didn't look like a building. It looked like a void. Men and women in suits that cost more than my entire life's earnings were streaming in and out, moving with the purposeful stride of people who owned the world. I stood on the sidewalk, feeling incredibly small. The wind whipped around the base of the tower, stinging my face. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. Dad knows. Dylan knows. They are watching. I felt the phantom weight of their eyes on the back of my neck, but then I remembered Marla. You don't belong here. I took a breath that rattled in my chest, unclenched my fists, and walked toward the revolving doors. The lobby was a cathedral of capitalism. The ceilings were 30 feet high, supported by pillars of white marble. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ozone. It was quiet, a hushed, reverent silence that swallowed the sound of footsteps. I walked across the polished floor, my marker-colored heels clicking loudly, feeling like an intruder in a temple. I approached the security desk. A man with a jaw square enough to break bricks looked down at me. I have an interview, I said, my voice sounding thin. Hazel Lawson, 9 o'clock. I prepared myself for the sneer. I prepared myself for him to look at a list, shake his head, and tell me that my appointment had been canceled. I braced myself for the humiliation of being escorted out. The guard typed my name into his console. He paused. Then he looked up, and his expression shifted. It wasn't dismissal, it was respect. Ms. Lawson, he said, nodding. You are expected. Please go to the reception desk on the far left. They are waiting for you. Waiting for me? I walked to the reception desk. A woman with hair so perfect it looked like a helmet smiled at me. Good morning, Ms. Lawson. We have been expecting you. You are cleared for the executive elevator. It is the last bank on the right. Scan this pass. She handed me a heavy plastic card. My hands were trembling as I took it. This didn't make sense. If my father had called, if he had branded me a thief and a liability, why were they letting me up? Why were they treating me like a VIP? I walked to the elevator bank. These weren't the main elevators packed with employees. These were the private lifts. I swiped the card, and the doors slid open instantly. I stepped inside. There were no buttons. The car just began to rise. My ears popped. 10 floors, 20, 30, 40. The numbers on the digital display climbed higher and higher, taking me further away from the street, further away from the world where Grant Lawson was king. The doors opened on the 50th floor. It wasn't a hallway, it was an antechamber. The carpet was thick enough to swallow my shoes. The walls were lined with modern art that probably cost millions. Sitting at a sleek, minimalist desk was a young man in a sharp gray suit. He stood up immediately as I stepped out of the elevator. "Ms. Lawson," he said. He didn't ask. He knew. "I am Marcus, Mr. Caldwell's executive assistant. Can I get you anything? Water? Espresso?" No, thank you," I stammered. I felt dizzy. This was wrong. This was all wrong. I was a candidate for a junior analyst position. I should be sitting in a plastic chair in HR on the 4th floor, waiting to be grilled by a middle manager. I shouldn't be here. "Please, follow me," Marcus said. He turned and walked toward a set of double doors made of frosted glass. As he reached for the handle, he paused and looked back at me. His expression was strange, a mixture of curiosity and solemnity. "You know," he said softly, "Mr. Caldwell has been waiting for this day for a long time." I froze. "Excuse me?" "Today," Marcus repeated. He cleared his schedule. "He has been waiting for you." "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I applied 3 days ago. I am just an applicant." Marcus didn't answer. He just smiled a tight, knowing smile, and pushed the doors open. The office beyond was vast. It was a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the entire city. The world below looked like a circuit board, tiny and insignificant, but I didn't look at the view. I looked at the man standing by the window. Rowan Caldwell turned around. I had seen his picture in magazines. I knew the face, the silver hair, the sharp eyes, the terrifying intelligence that radiated from him. But in person, he was different. He wasn't intimidating in the way my father was. My father took up space. He pushed you out of the room with his ego. Rowan Caldwell seemed to pull you in. He was still, composed, like the eye of a hurricane. He was not wearing a suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked at me, and his gaze was heavy. It wasn't the look of an interviewer assessing a candidate. He didn't look at my cheap suit. He didn't look at my scuffed shoes. He looked at my face, searching for something. "Hazel Lawson," he said. His voice was deep, resonant. "Mr. Caldwell," I managed to say. "Thank you for seeing me. I know my application was unconventional." He walked toward his desk, but he didn't sit down. He gestured for me to take the chair opposite him. I sat, placing my hands in my lap to hide the shaking. "Unconventional is one word for it," he said. He leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his ankles. "Your resume is a battlefield, Ms. Lawson, a promising start, followed by a scorched earth campaign. I can explain the gap," I began, launching into the speech I had rehearsed on the bus. "I encountered a significant professional block due to a family conflict. My former employer, your father." Rowan finished for me. I stopped. "Yes, my father. Grant Lawson." Rowan said the name as if tasting it, testing its weight. "He called me this morning, at 7:30, to be precise. He was quite passionate." My heart sank. It was over. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Dad had gotten to him. "I see," I said, my voice dull. "Then I suppose this interview is a formality. If he told you I'm a thief, I can only offer my word that it is not true, but I understand if his reference is disqualifying." I started to stand up. Thank you for your time. Mr. Caldwell, I won't waste any more of it. Sit down. Hazel, Rowan said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. But it had the weight of gravity. I sat. Rowan smiled. A small, dry expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. Your father told me many things. He told me you were unstable. He told me you embezzled funds. He told me you were a compulsive liar who had abandoned her family. He threatened that if Crownward hired you, he would make it his personal mission to create legal trouble for us. I closed my eyes. It was humiliating to hear it said out loud by a stranger. He is very thorough. He is, Rowan agreed. But there is one thing I have learned in 30 years of finance. Hazel, when a man screams that loud, it is usually because he is terrified of what will happen if anyone listens to the silence. He pushed off the desk and walked over to a wall panel on the far side of the room. It slid open to reveal a steel safe. It wasn't a standard office safe. It looked like a vault. I did not bring you here to interview you for a junior analyst position, Rowan said, his back to me as he spun the dial. You are overqualified for that, and frankly, you would be bored in a week. Then why am I here? I asked, confusion warring with fear. You are here because of a promise, he said. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. Rowan reached inside. He didn't pull out a stack of money. He didn't pull out a contract. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was sealed with red wax, old and brittle. On the front, written in a hand that I would recognize anywhere, a sharp, angular script that spoke of discipline and precision, was my name, Hazel Lawson. And below the name, a single instruction, to be opened only when she stands in this room of her own free will. Rowan turned back to me, holding the envelope. Your grandmother, Eleanor Price, sat in that exact chair 15 years ago. She was one of the first investors in this firm when everyone else told me I was crazy. She saved this company. My mouth fell open. My grandmother invested in Crownward? She was a silent partner, Rowan said. She had a brilliant mind for risk, and she knew people. Specifically, she knew your father. He walked over and placed the envelope on the desk in front of me. It looked heavy, dense with secrets. She told me that one day. Grant would try to crush you, Rowan said quietly. She told me that he would strip you of your name, your reputation, and your options. She made me promise that I would keep this safe until you found your way here. Not if I called you, not if you were sent here, but only if you came on your own, fighting against the current. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw warmth in his eyes. Grant Lawson called me this morning to tell me you were a thief, Rowan said. I listened to him for 5 minutes, and do you know what I thought? I shook my head, unable to speak. I thought, she is here. It is finally time. He tapped the envelope. Before we talk about a job, Hazel, you need to open this, because I have a feeling that once you read what is inside, you won't be asking for a position. You will be claiming one. I stared at the envelope. The wax seal was cracked slightly with age. My name stared back at me. My grandmother had been gone for 3 years. But in this room, 50 floors above the city, her presence was so strong it made the air vibrate. My father thought he had won. He thought he had cornered me. He didn't know that 15 years ago, a little old lady had walked into this office and planted a seed that was just now breaking through the soil. Go ahead, Rowan said. I reached out, my hand no longer shaking. I placed my fingers under the flap of the envelope. The threshold had been crossed. There was no going back now. The sound of the red wax cracking was loud in the silent office. It snapped with a dry, brittle report, like the breaking of a small bone. My hands were trembling, not from fear this time, but from a vibrating frequency of anticipation that hummed in my fingertips. I unfolded the heavy manila paper. The scent hit me immediately. It was not the sterile smell of a corporate office. It was the smell of lavender, dust, and menthol cigarettes. It was the smell of the cottage at the bottom of the garden. It was the smell of safety. I tipped the envelope. 3 distinct items slid out onto the polished mahogany of Rowan Caldwell's desk. The first was a letter, folded into a precise rectangle. The second was a legal document, bound in a blue cover, stamped with a seal I did not recognize. The third was a small black leather notebook. The edges were worn, the spine cracked from use. I reached for the letter first. I knew that handwriting. It was sharp, angular, and aggressive, the script of a woman who did not waste ink on hesitation. "My dear Hazel," it began. I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and painful. "If you are reading this, 2 things have happened. First, my son, your father, has finally shown you the full extent of his greed. He has tried to break you. He has tried to convince you that you are nothing without him, that you are a satellite that cannot exist without his gravity. Second, and more importantly, you have stopped listening to him. I knew this day would come. I watched him. Hazel, I watched how he looked at you when you brought home a report card with straight A's. He did not look proud. He looked threatened. Grant is a man who builds cages and calls them homes. He could never tolerate a bird that knew how to fly. So I knew he would try to clip your wings. I could not leave you money directly in the will. He would have found a way to take it. He would have claimed guardianship or mismanagement and absorbed it into that black hole he calls a company. So, I built a raft and hid it where he would never look, outside his world. You are not a thief, Hazel. You are the only honest soul in a den of liars. Now, wipe your eyes. You have work to do. Love, Grandma." I lowered the letter. The paper was shaking in my grip. She had known. 15 years ago, while I was just a teenager crying about math camp, she had looked at her son and seen the monster he would become. She hadn't just comforted me. She had prepared for war. "Look at the blue document," Rowan said softly. He was watching me with an intensity that felt grounding. Like an anchor, I opened the blue folder. It was a deed of trust. The legal language was dense, but my accounting brain latched onto the terms immediately. It was a blind trust, established in the year 2010. The assets within it were shielded, managed by an independent trustee, Rowan Caldwell. I scanned down to the assets section. Beneficiary, Hazel Lawson. Asset class, preferred equity units in Crownward Equity Group. Condition of transfer, the physical presence of the beneficiary at the Crownward headquarters, independent of family coercion. I stopped reading. I looked up at Rowan. "Equity units? In Crownward?" "Your grandmother was my first angel investor," Rowan explained, his voice low and steady. 30 years ago, when I was just a kid with a pitch deck and a bad suit, nobody would give me the time of day. Your father laughed at me. He told me my business model was a fantasy. But Eleanor? She sat me down, smoked half a pack of cigarettes, and wrote me a check for $50,000. She told me, "Make it grow, because I'm going to need it for my granddaughter." He leaned forward. That $50,000 bought her a 5% stake in the company. We have diluted and restructured over the years, but she refused to cash out. She kept rolling it over. That trust now holds a fraction of a percent of Crownward's total capitalization. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Hazel, you are not applying for a job here. You are a shareholder. The value of that trust, as of this morning's market opening, is roughly $2.4 million. $2.4 million. The number hung in the air. It was an abstraction. It was too big to comprehend. I thought about the $33 in my pocket. I thought about the ramen noodles I had eaten for dinner for 3 months. I thought about the toilet bowl cleaner burning my nostrils. I didn't feel rich. I felt lightheaded. "But that is not the most dangerous thing in that envelope," Rowan said. He pointed to the black notebook. "That is," I picked up the little black book. It felt heavy, heavier than the money. I opened it. It was a ledger, but it didn't track numbers. It tracked sins. Eleanor had treated my father's behavior like an audit. Every page was dated. August 4th, 2012. Grant canceled Hazel's summer program. Told her we could not afford the tuition. Lie. He bought a new boat the same week. Cost $12,000. June 10th, 2015. Dinner conversation. Grant told Hazel that girls who are too smart end up lonely. Psychological conditioning. AIM. Suppress ambition. March 1st, 2018. Hazel found the error in the tax filing. Grant took credit, told the partners he fixed a clerical error, did not mention her name. Page after page, year after year, she had written down every insult, every lie, every manipulation. She had recorded the dates, the times, and the context. It was a dossier of abuse. It was undeniable proof that my incompetence was a fabrication and that my theft was a projection. Why? I whispered, tracing the ink on the page. Why did she write all this? Because she knew your father's weapon of choice, Rowan said. Grant Lawson fights with reputation. He fights with rumors. He destroys credibility so that when his victims speak, no one listens. He made you a thief so that no one would believe you were a victim. Rowan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. But Eleanor gave you a shield, and she gave me a loaded gun. He turned back to me. Here is the twist. Hazel, because you are a beneficiary of a Crownward trust. You are now a protected entity under our corporate governance bylaws. If Grant Lawson calls me again, or calls any other employer, to slander you, he is not just attacking his daughter, he is attacking a major stakeholder of Crownward Equity Group. Rowan's eyes went cold, a terrifying, shark-like coldness that made me realize why he was the CEO. Our compliance department is very aggressive. If he spreads lies about you, it triggers a defamation suit from the firm itself. We don't sue for damages. Hazel, we sue for total liquidation. If he says one more word against you, my legal team will descend on Lawson Construction and take it apart brick by brick to protect our investors' interests. I stared at him. The tears finally spilled over. They weren't the hot, stinging tears of shame I had cried in the motel. They were cool, cleansing tears. For 2 years, I had been naked in a storm. Now, suddenly, I was standing inside a fortress. He can't touch me, I said. The realization was slow, like a sunrise. He actually can't touch me. He cannot, Rowan confirmed. You are untouchable. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, mindful of the cheap makeup I wore. So, what now? I take the money and I disappear? Rowan shook his head. You could take the $2 million, move to an island, and never think about Ridgehaven again. Eleanor gave you that choice, but I have a feeling that is not what you want. He walked back to his desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. I have an open position, he said. Senior financial analyst for our distressed assets division. It is not charity. I have seen your college transcripts, and I have read your grandmother's notes on your forensic skills. You have a mind for finding rot in a structure. Hazel, I need that. I looked at the offer. The salary was 6 figures. It was a career resurrection. But there is a catch, Rowan said. I tensed. There is always a catch. Next week, Rowan said. Crownward is hosting its annual Benefactors Gala. It is the biggest night of the year for us. Politicians, industry leaders, partners, they will all be there. He paused. Your father will be there. I went cold. My father? He has been trying to land a contract with us for 6 months, Rowan explained. The Whispering Pines development merger. He thinks he is close to signing. He bought a table at the gala to schmooze me. He expects to walk into that ballroom, shake my hand, and finalize the deal that will make him the king of the county. Rowan looked at me, his expression challenging. I want you to be there, not as a guest, not as his daughter. I want you to be introduced as our newest senior analyst and the representative of the Price Trust. I want you to stand on that stage. You want a showdown, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I want a correction. Rowan corrected me. He thinks he destroyed you. He thinks you are cleaning toilets in a motel. I want him to see you standing in the light, backed by the full weight of this firm. I want him to realize in front of 500 people. That he didn't bury you, he planted you. I looked down at my hands. They were still red and chapped from the chemicals at the lodge. I thought about the way he had laughed at me in the restaurant. Look at her. It suits her. I thought about Dylan's text. Just give up. I didn't want revenge. I was tired of fighting. I just wanted to be safe. I don't know if I can do that, I admitted. I don't want to cause a scene. I just want to live my life. Hazel, Rowan said gently, walking away is survival. Standing up is living. This isn't about hurting him. It is about putting the truth in its place. He has spent your whole life telling the world who you are. Don't you think it is time you introduced yourself? I looked at the ledger again. I read the entry from when I was 22. Hazel wanted to go to Boston. I told her she was too weak for the city. He had bet against me. He had bet everything against me. I looked up at Rowan Caldwell. I took a deep breath. Inhaling the expensive air of the 51st floor, I thought of Marla telling me to stop apologizing. I thought of Eleanor, smoking her cigarette, building a weapon out of patience and paper. He will be there? I asked. Front row, Rowan said. And if he tries to make a scene? Then he sentences himself, Rowan said. You don't have to say a word. You just have to stand there. I reached out and placed my hand on the blue folder. The paper felt cool and substantial. It felt like armor. Okay, I said. My voice was steady. I will take the job, and I will go to the gala. Rowan smiled. And this time, it was a genuine smile. It was the smile of a man who had just seen a good investment finally mature. Good, he said. Then we have a lot of work to do. We need to get you a wardrobe. We need to brief you on the portfolio. And Hazel? Yes? You might want to buy a new pair of shoes, he said, looking at my marker-colored heels. You are going to be walking on a very expensive stage. I looked down at my feet and laughed. It was a small, choked sound, but it was real. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't laughing to keep from crying. I was laughing because the joke was finally on someone else. Yes, I said. I think I can afford them now. The week leading up to the Crownward Partner and Community Fund Conference was not a blur. It was a slow, deliberate march toward a collision that had been 15 years in the making. In the movies, the heroine usually spends this time trying on dresses in a montage set to upbeat music, transforming from a scullery maid into a princess. My reality was different. I did not spend my time looking at silk samples. I spent it in a conference room with the Crownward legal team, dissecting the anatomy of a lie. Rowan Caldwell did not believe in leaving things to chance. He treated this gala not as a party, but as a military operation. The event was the crown jewel of the firm's social calendar, a night where 500 of the most influential people in the state gathered to drink champagne and sign 7-figure checks. My father, Grant Lawson, had purchased a platinum table near the front. He had spent $20,000 for the privilege of sitting within spitting distance of the man he wanted to impress. He thought he was buying access. He did not know he was buying a front-row seat to his own arraignment. Let's go over the allegation again, said Sarah Jenkins, the head of compliance. She was a woman who looked like she could cut glass with her jawline. I pushed a stack of bank statements across the table. The theft he refers to was a reimbursement dispute from 3 years ago. I used the company credit card to pay for emergency repairs on a site vehicle because the foreman could not reach my father. It was $450. My father claimed it was unauthorized personal use. I immediately wrote a personal check to the company to cover it. Just to end the argument, he cashed the check. Then he told the police, informally, that I had embezzled funds and only paid it back when caught. Sarah nodded, flipping through the pages. And here's the receipt for the repair. And here's the copy of your personal check, dated the same day as the dispute. And here's the email from the foreman confirming the vehicle was broken. She looked up, her expression grim. This is not theft. Hazel, this is not even a gray area. This is a fabrication. If he tries to bring this up, we have a paper trail that proves malice. We are not just defending you, we are documenting his liability. It felt strange to have people fighting for me. For so long, I had been the defendant in a court where the judge was also the executioner. Now, I had an army. While the lawyers built the shield, Rowan handled the sword. He was orchestrating the evening with terrifying precision. I was not to be hidden away. I was not to be a surprise guest who jumped out of a cake. I was to be integrated into the very fabric of the company. "You are the new face of the Distressed Assets Division," Rowan told me as we walked through the empty ballroom 2 days before the event. Workers were hanging massive chandeliers overhead. "You are not a victim, Hazel. You are a heavy hitter. You need to look like one." The wardrobe team did not put me in a ball gown. They put me in a tuxedo-style jumpsuit made of midnight blue silk. It was sharp, tailored, and intimidating. It did not ask for attention. It commanded respect. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the girl who scrubbed toilets at Pinebrook Lodge. I saw someone dangerous. I saw someone who looked like she belonged in the boardroom. Not the back office. It was me, but undimmed. It was the version of Hazel Lawson that would have existed if my father had not spent 2 decades trying to dim the lights. But the enemy gets a vote, and my father was not sitting idle. The first warning shot came on Thursday night, 24 hours before the gala. I was in the temporary corporate apartment Rowan had set up for me, studying the guest list. When my burner phone rang, I had kept the number active only for family emergencies. Though I had blocked my father and Dylan, the screen said Mom. I hesitated. My mother, Sylvia, was a ghost in her own life. She rarely made calls that were not scripted by my father. If she was calling, it was usually because he was standing over her shoulder. Mouthing the words, I answered. "Hello, Mom?" "Hazel," she whispered. Her voice sounded thin, frantic. "Are you alone?" "Yes. Why are you whispering?" "Your father is in the study," she said, the words rushing out. "He is on the phone with the editor of the Ridgehaven Gazette, and he has called a reporter from the city channel." "Why?" I asked, gripping the phone. "He is preparing a story," she said, her voice trembling. "He found out. I don't know how, but he suspects something about your grandmother. He thinks you might try to claim something from the estate. He is going to announce that you manipulated Eleanor in her final months. He is going to call it inheritance fraud. He wants to say you coerced a senile old woman into signing documents she didn't understand." Inheritance fraud. It was a brilliant, vicious angle. It played perfectly into the unstable daughter narrative. If I showed up with a trust fund, he would say I stole it. He would say I took advantage of a dying woman. He was planting the landmines before I even took a step. "He is going to bring the reporters to the gala?" I asked, my voice cold. "He says he wants to protect the community from you." My mother sobbed. "Hazel, please, don't come. He is going to destroy you. He has the medical records, or forged ones, saying Eleanor was not of sound mind. He will paint you as a monster who preyed on her own grandmother." I closed my eyes. It was so predictable. And yet, it still hurt. It hurt that he would desecrate his own mother's memory just to hurt me. He would call his own mother senile. He would erase her sharp mind and her agency, just to keep me poor. "Mom," I said, "listen to me. Just come home," she begged. "We can fix this. If you come home, he will call off the reporters." "I am not coming home," I said. "But I need you to do one thing for me. One thing. Mom, for once in your life." "What?" "Tomorrow night," I said. "When he starts speaking, when he tells these lies, do not nod, do not agree. You don't have to fight him. I know you can't. But do not help him. Do not lie for him. Just for one night. Mom, be my mother, not his witness." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a small, broken whisper. "I will try." The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, the city lights twinkling below me. The inheritance fraud narrative was a bluff. We had the medical records proving Eleanor was sharp as a tack until the day she died. We had the dates. We had the lawyer's testimony. But the fact that he was willing to go that low meant he was scared. He sensed a trap, even if he didn't know the shape of it. 10 minutes later, my phone pinged, a text from a number I didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. It was Dylan. "You are making a mistake." Mom is crying in the kitchen. Dad is tearing the house apart looking for old files. "You are disgracing this family. Is that what you want? To be the girl who burned down her own house? Just stay away. We are happy without you." I looked at the message. Dylan, the golden boy, the brother who had watched me clean up his messes for 20 years. He didn't care about the truth. He just wanted the boat not to rock. He wanted his inheritance to be smooth sailing. I typed back. My fingers were steady. The family is not a hammer you use to pound people into the dirt. Dylan, and I am not a nail anymore. If the house burns down, it is because Dad was the one playing with matches. I blocked the number. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. I stood by the window of the apartment, looking at the reflection of the city in the glass. Tomorrow, 500 people would be watching. Tomorrow, I would have to stand on a stage and let my father throw his spear, trusting that the shield Rowan and Eleanor had built would hold. My phone buzzed one last time. It was my father. He must have used a different phone, or unblocked himself on the carrier side. "I know you are in the city. I know you are up to something. If you step foot in that ballroom tomorrow, I will not just ruin your reputation, I will have you arrested. I have friends in the precinct. I will make sure you spend the night in a cell. Come home, or destroy yourself. Your choice." I stared at the threat. Arrested. He was desperate. He was flailing. He was a king who realized his castle was built on sand, and he was trying to scream the tide away. I put the phone down and walked over to the side table where I kept Eleanor's letter. I unfolded it one last time. I read the final paragraph. "Freedom is not something you ask for. Hazel, it is not a permission slip signed by your father. Freedom is something you choose. It is the moment you realize that the door was never locked. You were just too afraid to turn the handle." I touched the ink. It was 15 years old, but it felt fresh. I was done being afraid. I was done explaining myself. I was done trying to prove I was innocent to a man who needed me to be guilty. I didn't reply to his text. I didn't call Rowan in a panic. I didn't cry. I went to the closet and looked at the midnight blue jumpsuit hanging there. It looked like a uniform for a soldier. "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "You want a show? You want to tell the world who I am?" I turned off the light. "Then let's let them hear you." I decided then and there, I would not argue with him tomorrow. I would not scream back. I would not engage in a shouting match that would make us look like a dysfunctional family squabble. I would do something far more damaging. I would stand there. I would let him pour his poison out in front of the most powerful people in the state. I would let him show them exactly who he was. Because the truth about revenge is that you don't always have to pull the trigger. Sometimes, you just have to hand your enemy the gun and wait for him to look down the barrel. Tomorrow night, Grant Lawson was going to sentence himself, and I would be the one holding the gavel. The ballroom of the Crownword Hotel was not just a room, it was a gold-plated arena designed to make ordinary people feel small. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm, expensive light over 500 of the state's most powerful people. The air smelled of orchid arrangements, champagne, and raw ambition. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtain of the main stage, watching the feed on a small monitor. My heart was beating a steady, rhythmic tattoo against my ribs, but my hands were still. The midnight blue silk jumpsuit fit like a second skin, armor tailored for modern warfare. I watched my father enter. Grant Lawson did not walk into a room. He invaded it. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than my entire tuition, and he moved with the swagger of a man who believes he has already won. My mother, Sylvia, trailed a step behind him, her smile plastered on like a frantic plea for safety. Dylan was there too, looking uncomfortable in his stiff collar. Scanning the room for someone to impress, I watched my father work the room. He was in his element. He shook hands with senators. He clapped business rivals on the shoulder with a jovial aggression. He was selling the brand of Grant Lawson, the family man, the pillar of the community, the trustworthy builder. I saw him corner a board member of a regional bank near the bar. I turned up the volume on the monitor slightly, though the ambient noise made it hard to hear, but I could read his lips. I knew the script by heart. He leaned in, his face assuming a mask of tragic paternal concern. He gestured vaguely. He was telling the story. My daughter. Such a shame. Sticky fingers. We tried to help her, but she is unstable. The board member nodded sympathetically, looking solemn. My father patted the man's arm, accepting the condolence for the daughter he had murdered with words. It was a masterclass in character assassination. He was salting the earth so that even if I survived the famine he created, nothing would ever grow for me again. He is good at it, a voice said beside me. Rowan Caldwell was adjusting his cufflinks. He looked calm, almost bored, but his eyes were sharp as flint. He has had 30 years of practice, I said. He believes his own lie. That is why he is so convincing. Well, Rowan said, checking his watch, let us see how he handles the truth. It tends to be a bit more stubborn than a rumor. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The murmur of conversation died down as the spotlight hit the center stage. Rowan walked out. The applause was polite, restrained, the sound of people who wanted something from him. I stayed behind the curtain. The darkness was cool. Rowan approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, tonight is about the future. It is about identifying value where others see risk. At Crownward, we pride ourselves on seeing the truth behind the numbers. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Tonight, I am pleased to announce a significant expansion of our distressed assets division. We have brought on a new senior analyst to lead our forensic accounting unit, a professional with an uncanny ability to find the truth buried in the ledger. I took a deep breath. Please welcome Hazel Lawson. I stepped out. The spotlight hit me. It was blindingly white, erasing the audience for a split second until my eyes adjusted. I walked to the center of the stage, my heels clicking on the hardwood. A sharp, deliberate sound. I did not smile. I did not wave. I stood next to Rowan, tall and unyielding. I scanned the front row. I saw him. Grant Lawson was sitting at table 1, a glass of champagne halfway to his mouth. He froze. The glass tilted, spilling a stream of liquid onto the white tablecloth, but he did not notice. His mouth hung slightly open. He looked at me, blinking, as if his brain was refusing to process the visual data. He saw the daughter he had branded a thief. He saw the girl he thought was scrubbing toilets 3 hours away. But he did not see the uniform. He saw the silk. He saw the way I stood next to Rowan Caldwell, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. For a moment, confusion washed over his face, then rage. He stood up. It was a violent motion, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What is this?" he shouted. The room went deadly silent. 500 heads turned toward the front row. "Grant, sit down," my mother hissed, tugging at his jacket. She remembered her promise to me. She was trying, in her weak way, to stop the train wreck. But Grant Lawson did not sit down. He walked toward the stage, his face turning a mottled red. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is a joke, right, Rowan?" my father bellowed, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "You hired her? After I warned you? This girl is a liability. She is a thief. She stole from her own family." Rowan did not flinch. He did not signal security. He just watched my father approach the edge of the stage like a scientist observing a volatile chemical reaction. "Mr. Lawson," Rowan said into the microphone, his voice calm and amplified. "I would advise you to return to your seat. Ms. Lawson is a valued member of this firm. Furthermore, she is here representing the Eleanor Price Trust, of which she is the sole beneficiary and a significant stakeholder in this company." The words hit my father like physical blows. Eleanor Price Trust. Stakeholder. "Trust?" My father laughed, a frantic, high-pitched sound. "She is lying. She conned my mother. She is a fraud. She is mentally unstable." He was at the stairs of the stage now. He looked up at me, his eyes bulging. He thought he could bully me down. He thought he could shout loud enough to make me disappear. "Tell them," he screamed at me. "Tell them you are a charity case. Tell them you came here to beg." I stepped up to the microphone. I looked down at him. I felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no anger, just a cold, clinical pity. "I am not here to beg, Father," I said. My voice was steady, clear as a bell. "And I did not steal from you. You know that. The $450 was for a truck repair. You cashed the reimbursement check I wrote you. We have the receipt." "You are a liar!" he screamed, losing all control. "I destroyed you. I made sure you couldn't get a job anywhere. I told the whole town not to hire you. I made you a ghost." The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of polite society. It was the vacuum of a room where the air had been sucked out. He had said it. He had screamed it into a room full of witnesses. "I told the whole town not to hire you." He realized it a second too late. He looked around, seeing the faces of the bankers, the lawyers, the politicians. They were not nodding in sympathy anymore. They were looking at him with horror. He had just admitted to a systematic, malicious campaign to destroy his own daughter's livelihood. Rowan leaned into the mic. "Thank you for that confirmation. Mr. Lawson, as I mentioned on the phone this morning, our calls are recorded for quality assurance. And since you have just publicly admitted to tortious interference and defamation against a Crownward stakeholder, our legal department will be in touch." My father stood there, mouth agape, looking like a fish pulled onto the dock. "Also," Rowan continued, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze nitrogen, "regarding the Whispering Pines merger." My father's head snapped up. This was the lifeline. This was the deal he had sold me to save. "Crownward Equity Group has a strict ethical compliance code," Rowan said. "We do not partner with individuals who demonstrate a flagrant disregard for integrity. We do not do business with men who sabotage their own blood for sport. The deal is dead. Grant, we are pulling all funding, effectively immediately." My father swayed. "No," he whispered. "You can't. I leveraged everything for this." "You leveraged the wrong thing," Rowan said. Security finally moved in. 2 large men flanked my father. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were pleading now. He wanted me to fix it. He wanted me to be the daughter who cleaned up the mess. I looked at him. "I can't help you, Dad," I said softly, though the microphone picked it up. "I am just the help, remember?" They escorted him out. He didn't fight. He looked broken. A man who had built a monument to himself and then pulled the keystone out with his own hands. My mother followed, head bowed. Weeping into a handkerchief, Dylan sat at the table, frozen, pretending he was invisible. I stood on the stage, the lights shining on me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. The weight of 29 years had just been lifted off my shoulders. The applause started slowly, then grew. It wasn't for me, exactly. It was for the show. It was for the justice. But I didn't care. I walked off the stage, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back to see if anyone was following me. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Without the Crownward deal, my father's company collapsed under the weight of its own debt. The rumors he had spread about me turned on him. In a small town, once the king falls, the villagers are quick to tear down the castle. He was forced to sell the business for parts. I stayed in the city. I took the job. I worked hard. Not because I had to prove myself, but because I loved the work. I used the dividends from the trust to buy a small apartment with a view of the river. It was quiet. It was mine. I set up the Eleanor Price Scholarship for girls in Ridgehaven who wanted to study finance. The only requirement was that they had to leave town to use it. 3 months later, my mother called. "He is depressed," she said. "He sits in the dark. He wants to see you." "I can't do that." Mom, I said. He is your father, she cried. Doesn't that mean anything? It means he gave me life, I said. It does not mean he owns it. I forgive you. Mom, I forgive you for not standing up. But I am not coming back to that house. It is a beautiful prison, but I am done being an inmate. I hung up. Then came the text from Dylan. You happy? You won. We are selling the lake house. Dad is a mess. Hope you are proud of yourself for rewriting history. I typed back one last time. I didn't rewrite history. Dylan, I just read the ledger out loud. You can change, but you don't get to edit the truth. I deleted his number. The final scene of this story did not happen in a boardroom or a bank. It happened on a windy afternoon in late November. I drove back to Ridgehaven. I didn't stop at my parents' house. I drove straight to the cemetery on the hill. The grass was brown with frost. Eleanor's grave was simple, a gray stone marker under an oak tree. I had brought a bouquet of lavender and wild lilies, the kind she used to grow in the cottage garden. I knelt down and placed the flowers on the cold earth. I pulled out the black notebook from my purse. I hadn't written in it. I didn't need to keep a record anymore. The debt was paid. The account was closed. You were right, I said to the stone. You were right about everything. He tried to break the lock, but you gave me the key. The wind rustled the dry leaves of the oak tree. It sounded like a whisper. Smart girl. I stood up and brushed the dirt from the knees of my expensive trousers. I looked down at the town below. It looked small. It looked like a toy set that someone had forgotten to put away. It had no power over me anymore. The ghosts were gone. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp, cold air. I am free, I said, and then I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I watched the road ahead. It was wide, and it was open, and for the first time in my life, it was entirely mine. This is Hazel Lawson, signing off. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and reclamation, please leave a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts on how Hazel handled her father. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lucy Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear that freedom is always a choice.